This is Railblazer, California's Great America, and this is one of the first modern single rail coasters. So are the originals better than the newer versions? Let's find out. First, welcome to 808 Coaster Life. If you're new to this channel and you love roller coasters and other theme park related stuff, please consider subscribing. The first of Rocky Mountain Construction's Raptor models was actually Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. I know, it's too long of a name and Fiesta Texas barely beat them to it. But Railblazer opened soon after as a mirrored clone of this ride. These two offer very similar experiences, so many aspects of this review can also be applied to Golden Lasso Coaster. This, however, was not my first ever RMC Raptor. I've actually previously ridden Wonder Woman Flight of Courage, which is not the same as the prototypes. It's a completely different layout, and it's located at Six Flags Magic Mountain. You following so far? I was impressed with its re-rideability and dynamic layout. However, the general consensus is that the prototype Raptors, those being Railblazer and Golden Lasso Coaster, are the best Raptors. Let's see if I would agree. The first thing you'll find out is that this ride is very photogenic. It does not look like McDonald's. In fact, it actually has, in my opinion, a great color scheme. And if you ever wanted to take photos or videos of it, you can easily get many different angles. As a YouTuber, rides like Railblazer make my life easier. The interesting thing is because this ride replaced Invertigo, which was an inverted boomerang that used to operate at this park, there's a small field of grass near the ride since Railblazer did not take up the entire plot of land. The other thing you'll notice is that this coaster looks like it runs on 1.5x speed, or when you turn the friction all the way down in Planet Coaster. I knew this in advance, but was still somehow shocked when I saw it in person. This ride has an off-roader or adventure theme, and that can mostly be seen with the rockwork scattered throughout the ride. You actually go through a little tunnel when you go down the first drop, although to be honest, you're hardly gonna notice it. The front row in each train also has handlebars you can grab to mimic an ATV experience. There's not much theming besides that though, it's more stylized, but still looks great in my opinion. I will warn that this ride can get the longest line in the park due to poor capacity. It features 8 riders per train, which for reference is the same as Gerstlauer Eurofighters. At least it can run 3 trains. We used Fastlane when we visited, although apparently on busy days, the Fastlane line can also be a single rider line depending on who's operating it. Your experience will vary. The station is shaded, which I wouldn't normally talk about this, but since it's CGA, it's worth a mention. But there are cubbies in the station, so you don't need to buy a locker for your smaller items. One thing this ride doesn't have is a moving loading station. Both of the Wonder Woman rides, that being the prototype and the larger one, have moving loading stations. It may be easier to get the row you want on Railblazer, but this overall slows down operations. They have assigned seating too, but they may be able to take row requests depending on the seat assigner. If you had to ride this ride once, I would definitely recommend the back row. Besides being the best row on most coasters, apparently the first time the ride's designer, Alan Schilke, was blown away by one of his creations was when he rode this ride's mirrored clone in the back row. So as one would expect, all 5 of my rides were in the last 2 rows. Railblazer's trains feature 8 rows with 1 person per row, so you get to ride this ride alone, which definitely makes the ride feel more interesting. If this ride is supposed to be themed to an adventure vehicle, then the Vesper trains fit that theme very well, because they literally look like seatbelts. They are noticeably tighter than the newer Raptors, which I actually found comfortable. So depending on your height, it could be a little hard to breathe. This ride may leave you breathless anyway, so I don't know if that really matters. I know many people would wish this ride had some kind of lap bar, but according to the lead designer, Alan Schilke, the vest is needed due to the ride's intensity, and I believe them. You have to straddle a hump in the middle of the floor, probably because the ride has a low center of gravity. It makes it a little awkward, but not a deal breaker. Overall, not the worst seat, but not the best either. This ride has a height of 106 feet. It's actually 7 feet shorter than its clone due to how the rides were placed. It has a 100-foot drop at 90 degrees. It goes a top speed of 52 miles per hour, and it goes through a total of 1,800 feet of track. So you start your ride experience by going straight into the lift hill. It's pitched at 45 degrees, so it'll feel pretty steep, and you'll get great views of the park to the left and right. After you reach the top, you then take a sharp turn to the left, which actually had a little bit of laterals. You then go through the ride's first drop, which is vertical. This drop does not last long, especially in the back, but it has very strong ejector airtime. You then pull a lot of positive G's in the first valley before rising up into your first inversion, a Raven Dive. Raven Dives are similar to dive loops, but the twisting happens later in the inversion, so it gives airtime and whip in addition to positive G's. I found this Raven Dive more intense than on Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. You then pull a lot of positives before going into like an off-axis twisted airtime hill. This element combines very strong ejector airtime with some laterals, making for a very wild and chaotic element. After that, you take a sharp turnaround to the right while rising up. If you grayed out in this section, I would not blame you, because it was very intense. You then take a sharp turn to the left, which provided some good laterals. You then experience what I like to call the yeet drop, since that's what it feels like. This is the strongest moment of airtime I've ever experienced on a coaster so far, especially in the back row. So much pressure is briefly applied to your collarbone, it does feel like you're getting launched out of your seat. I'd be very curious to find out what G-force you hit on that drop. You then go into a cutback, which is basically an overbank turn that goes all the way upside down. This was the one element that I would call meh, but considering the rest of the ride, I'm not even mad about that. You don't get any hang time, but I'm sure you hit 0 Gs for a little bit, and there are some laterals from transitioning upside down and back. You then go into a corkscrew, which really feels like a 0 G roll. It was very fun and pretty graceful. I mean, I have an experienced Storm Chaser and its so-called corked roll, but if this isn't a corked roll, then I have lots of questions. You then take an overbank turn to the left, which definitely brings back the intensity. It was very forceful. It's also my favorite element to video, cause it's just so aesthetic, you know? You then jump up into the brakes, ending your ride on Railblazer. So let me tell you, when I got to the brake run on this ride for the first time, I was like actually shook. Like, not a lot of rides leave me speechless, but that ride did for like a decent bit. I was just like, how can a ride be this intense and then just stop? Needless to say, this was one of the most intense roller coasters I've ever ridden. Like, if I wanted to marathon this ride, I would have to get a breather in between each ride. The pullouts on this ride felt as intense as Batman the Ride clones and has the strongest airtime I've ever experienced on a coaster so far. And there were even some laterals sprinkled throughout the ride. And even with this intensity, this ride was quite smooth. It was a little rattly and some pullouts, but to me, it was hardly noticeable. I do agree with others that the second half definitely was not as good as the first half, but considering the first half is the way it is, that's fine by me. It is a short ride, but I didn't feel like it needed to be much longer than it currently is. Like, maybe a couple more airtime hills would make it perfect. And this ride is as fast paced as it looks. I would say this is the best paced coaster I've ridden as well. Overall, the pros are the intensity, pacing, single file seating, and aesthetics. The cons are the restraints and throughput. This ride actually gets a perfect 5 stars. Quick disclaimer, these scores do not completely determine my rankings. So are the prototype Raptors the best Raptors? Yeah, by a bit. They have smaller trains and height, and the layout is much more compact, making them more intense. I would say Wonder Woman Flight of Courage felt more re-rideable, and the restraints are more comfortable, but Railblazer definitely dialed up the intensity compared to Flight of Courage. I'd be curious to try out Stunt Pilot at Silverwood, because that ride is a slightly modified version of the prototype layout and has longer trains. I'd say the one thing this ride really should improve on is its restraints, but the solution already exists. I believe Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster, that being the prototype, is reportedly getting the newer restraints. Hopefully it does improve the ride, because I actually found the newer restraints comfortable. Of course, we can't talk about California's Great America without talking about its potential closing in the next decade. Although I'm not too worried about this ride, because first of all, it's a cloned ride, so even if they do decide to scrap this ride, you can still ride Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster. And since it's a cloned ride and it's still fairly new, I would expect them to want to make more out of their investment, so most likely I think they would relocate this ride to another Six Flags park. If you want to ride the best coaster in Northern California, in my opinion, definitely check this ride out. Definitely take a visit to California's Great America and try get a ride on Railblazer. This is in my top 5 coasters I've ridden currently, and that's even after visiting Fuji-Q Highland. This and Gold Striker are a good enough reason to visit California's Great America, in my opinion. I mean, towards the end of the day, we were basically going back and forth between riding Railblazer, then riding Gold Striker, until the park closed. And yes, another great coaster at California's Great America is Gold Striker. Check out my review of that coaster in the card up there. What are your thoughts on Railblazer, or its mirrored clone, or any of the other Raptors? Do you think the prototype Raptors are the best Raptors? Put your thoughts down in the comments below. Here's some other videos you should watch, and if you enjoyed this one, consider leaving a like, and maybe even subscribe. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.